Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Squared Up Coffee Break webinar. My name is Matthew Long, and this month we're discussing application dashboards with Splunk and ServiceNow. I'm joined today by a Squared Up Coffee Break newcomer, John Shaw.
Hello.
And I'll introduce John properly in a minute, but first I want to just quickly cover over what we're going to be looking at in today's session. So we're going to be looking at displaying data from Splunk and ServiceNow in the context of enterprise applications, which is a topic we've kind of danced around repeatedly on the coffee break, and we talked about way back in the mists of time. I think in episode number 4, we initially introduced this idea of bringing ITSM data into the context of your sort of monitoring information. But a lot's changed in that time, specifically with Squared Up 4.2 as well. So we thought we'd just do a session where we talk again about the value of that integration in case you haven't got a perfect memory. Remember webinar from 2 years ago. And then look at some getting started resources, and then sort of bring that together with the new features that Richard showed off in the 4.2 webinar, and take a bit of a deep dive into how that's really sort of changed the game. Okay, so with that, I promised I'd introduce him. So I'm joined today by John. John is, as the slide says, the man with the plan. He's joined Squared Up as the Chief Product Officer, and that basically means he's running engineering. So John is my boss's boss. It's a bit scary. So John, why don't you talk us a bit about what you're doing at Squared Up and sort of what you're sort of here to chat about today?
Thanks, Matthew. I'm not that scary, although the photo may make me look scary. So yeah, I joined Squared Up a couple of months ago, and I was attracted by what I think is a really, really cool product, and I've heard very glowing things from customers and partners about it since. So I'm feeling very happy to be here. I think there's also some really exciting things that we can do to make the product even bigger and cooler, and we're going to talk about some of the things we've just done. I'd also love to hear from you, hence very bravely my email address appearing on the screen. So we're going to talk particularly today about ServiceNow, Splunk, and similar tools and how to integrate them. And we think there's a lot more we can do there in terms of building a dashboard for all of the tools that an IT team uses. So I would certainly like to hear from any of you, particularly on ITSM, ServiceNow, and similar tools, but more generally on kind of how you'd like to see us build a bigger, better, more broad dashboard that brings in all of the tools that you use. The other area that I'm very interested in hearing about is cloud, and in particular Azure, and how you're thinking of using Azure Monitor or not, and what you might like to see us do there. So I'd love to hear from you. I should point out, Matthew was keen to make sure we put this caveat on. I'll of course be very open to hearing about support issues and concerns you have, but I'm probably not the best person for you to contact if you want to be absolutely sure of getting a quick response from someone who's an expert. So don't forget to contact support for support issues as well.
Yep. Cool. Okay, so with sort of introductions done, let's dive into our topic. So come on, PowerPoint. There we go. So I think we said at the top of the beginning, this whole session's about sort of integrating ITSM data and the value of doing so, right?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, so the sort of, and we want to spend just a few minutes now on kind of why do this, and maybe take a sort of, a kind of backwards look, as in sort of what are the results you can get by doing it. So for those of you who've been to some of these webinars before, we've already done much more detailed webinars on how to build these kind of integrations, but we're going to kind of show you the results you can get, maybe to remind you. For those of you who haven't seen them, it might get you interested. It might be something you can show to your boss, your colleague, who you're trying to persuade that this is a good idea. So there's two real reasons that we see for integrating ITSM tools like ServiceNow. It's obviously the biggest one, or log analytics like Splunk. Again, that's the biggest one, but other tools are available. And the two main reasons: one is, when you're monitoring the health of an application, you can get more context by also taking into account things like what incidents are users reporting, and those are typically going into your ServiceNow or similar tool. Or are there any problems that have been recognized by the support team as an actual issue that needs fixing? Or maybe there's some changes either that have just been made that might have been the underlying cause of an issue, or that are coming up, and all those things are typically tracked in your ITSM tool. And then, of course, if you are actually digging in, drilling down, investigating an issue in your dashboard, again, you can get kind of more context from, for example, from a tool like Splunk. You can get event data from different silos that aren't being monitored by your monitoring system, you might be able to get more detailed events, security logs, operating system event logs, those kind of things. And then from the ITSM tool, things that have changed recently, changes that have been published, or any kind of problems that have just been fixed. They might be things that don't necessarily show up as an issue, but they might actually be an underlying cause in terms of investigating root causes. So we think bringing these things together with your monitoring data can just make things way more powerful.
Yep, there's really sort of two prongs here. The first is you want to reduce mean time to resolution as quickly as you can.
Yep.
And putting all the data in one place is certainly a great way of attacking that. And then the other side of that is working the right problems. It's all very well and good you having a great MTTR, but if you're always solving things that the business doesn't care about, they're not going to see the value of that. So, making sure that you're looking at an application saying, oh, this app's looking green, but there's user-reported problems. Clearly we have a gap in our monitoring. I'll jump on that. Or, this thing's on fire, but no one's complaining about it. So, maybe that team is on away day today, and actually they don't care about this particular app right now. This can be deprioritized, and you can work on something else instead. So it's really about having that sort of full picture of your whole environment.
So I'll tell you what, why don't we stop PowerPointing and maybe show what this can look like?
Yep, let's get a demo. Okay.
All right, so we've picked a kind of a view of the applications in a typical system, or a representative system maybe, and we're starting here with, this is the matrix tile that's showing what the monitoring system is showing, what SCOM is showing as the availability of these different apps. And so if we look at the sales app, that was showing all nice and green for the last 24 hours. But we've drilled into the sales app, and you can see that actually, within that sales app, while the reported availability is showing green and healthy, we're actually showing 4 open incidents right now. There haven't been any recent changes or any open problems, but there have been 4 open incidents that haven't been resolved. And those counts, that 400, are actually coming out of ServiceNow. And so you can see we've got a ServiceNow perspective here, and we can drill into that and get into some more detail. So there's the 4 incidents and the 0 changes there. But we've now got a table underneath, so you can actually drill in and see what are those 4 open incidents in ServiceNow. Yep. You can see there's this guy Sam Lord. He may be a familiar name to some of you, but he's as well as being an expert on ServiceNow, he seems to be a bit of an awkward customer as well. And he's first spotted that Web 01 server is well, he's been a bit rude about it. Maybe we won't repeat what he said. And he's now more recently actually been unable to log into the application itself. So there's 2 incidents there that are indicators that might be something actually wrong with this system, even if the monitoring system's showing it as healthy. Yep.
I also noticed that I can click on any of these and jump to ServiceNow as well.
Right, so each one will take you straight through. That's going, straight through to his unable to log in incident, so you can see more details there.
Yep.
What the problem? Yeah, I mean, clearly, we've built the table here to show just the sort of the fields that we think are most important. Who requested it, who's it assigned to, what's the priority, and so on. But you can go drill straight into ServiceNow and see the full gory detail if you're wanting to know more. Yep. And we're also showing, underneath there's actually incidents that have been closed, they've been solved or worked around or whatever. And again, that can sometimes be a clue as to what's going on. And then finally, may be relevant, may not be relevant, but we're showing some detail on the changes that happen. And you can see there's this guy called Ashley Thompson who's updated the branding on the website recently. It has been completed, that change, but if you notice in the closure code, he wrote successful with issues. So maybe there's a little bit of a red flag there.
That's somewhat suspicious, isn't it?
It is somewhat suspicious, yeah.
Yep.
All right, so that's a sort of a view on ServiceNow. And if so that's sort of looking at the thing overall. Actually, if we were to go in, we could actually go in also to see kind of servers within that application. I don't know if we want to kind of go in. Oh, do you want to look at Splunk first? Or let's do Splunk first. Go on then. I was thinking we should also show the perspectives on ServiceNow if we go into a particular resource. We'll come back and do that. So Splunk, yeah, I mean, while we're digging into our investigation, I mean, another place we might go to see if we can work out what was behind Sam Lord not being able to log in is we can actually go through, and this is now pulling all of the data relevant to that application out of Splunk. And so we can see, things around services stopping and so on and so on. There might be some clues there. If we scroll down, I think we've then got. So this is the most 50 most recent events from the application log, but we've also pulled things further down, I think, out of the
we've got some
security logs and so on. So there might be something in there. And then Matthew was helpfully hovering over something that might provide us a bit of a clue there, which is we can see that one particular event, and again we can kind of drill through. This time we're actually drilling through to the server that's related, but that particular event that there was that there was a faulty username that did not match that for the login provided. So there's by going through to that particular server, we're now just pulling out the Splunk log events, events logged into Splunk that are relevant to that server.
Yeah, so now we can immediately see the logons failed. So maybe that change that was implemented, developers accidentally pulled across a password from the dev environment into production. They've deployed that, it's broken the app.
For example.
I mean, that ever happens in the real world at all.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, so now, as John was saying, we can see the context of Splunk in this one server, but we can do the same thing.
And that's the thing I was indicating earlier on. So now we can actually see ServiceNow in the context of that's a perspective, if you like, on just that one server, that SQL server. And there we can see there are no open incidents on ServiceNow, no open changes for that particular database. So who knows? Maybe that is the source of Sam's problem. Maybe it's not. But you can see we're kind of quickly getting into the kind of the underlying causes of a potential issue. Without ever leaving our dashboard.
Yep, exactly. It's very, very quick. We're able to see two different monitoring tools and also our ITSM product all in one interface and all in one context. We don't have to flip to the tool and then go and find a different CI, right? I can go from events relating to this application to tickets related to this application to monitoring data for this particular application all in a single click. So yeah, it's very, very, very powerful. And it's also quite performant. And you don't have to grant someone access to all of those systems because Squared Up is impersonating users when it contacts all of those. If I can get to this dashboard, I've got access to the Splunk data, the ServiceNow data, without having to keep track of 50 different logons and knowledge of where those particular tools are housed and everything else. And the way this works is we're not constantly scraping those systems for data. When a user hits this dashboard, we dynamically go and query at that point in time and pull the data back. So it is data on demand. It's not more databases and more sort of data and, Squared Up thinks these incidents are this way, but that hasn't pulled the most recent incidents in the last 5 minutes, that kind of thing.
Yep.
So it is pretty performant, it's pretty lightweight, and we cache the data as well for small time. So if someone else hits the dashboard, just after we've clicked here, they're going to see the same input. We're not constantly going to keep thrashing the API over and over again.
Yeah, and we're only pulling the data out of ServiceNow. It's pulled out, live as you hit it for the first time, but we're only pulling it out when you hit that perspective on ServiceNow. So it's not constantly pulling data out. It's only when someone's viewing a dashboard.
Yep, absolutely.
All right,
cool.
So that's pretty cool. And there may be some people watching this who are wondering, well, how do I do that in my own system? And there are some great resources available, links here. On how to integrate ServiceNow, how to integrate Splunk, and as I mentioned, other ITSM and log analytics tools are available. So in both cases, we're actually doing that using our Web API tool, Web API tile, which can be used to provide similar views into any tool that exposes an API effectively that you can use to query.
Yep, the JSON-based REST API. So I've linked you there to the support articles. If you go to those, you have full written up walkthroughs on how to do this stuff. Plus, there's also videos where appropriate for previous copy breaks or presentations. So there's a lot of info there. So at this point, if you're new to the stuff we've just shown you or new to Squared Up, I would say, especially if you're watching the recording, stop watching the recording, go and look at those resources, familiarize yourself with them, and then come back to this point. Because what we're going to do now is look at some of the new stuff that was made available in 4.2. And then, so we're not going to go through setting all these things up and configuring Squared Up providers and things like that. Bluntly, just because we don't have time. Each of those webinars, we have a webinar for each of those three. They're all an hour each, so we don't want to do 3 hours of reading before we start this. But in terms of Squared Up 4.2, for those of you who haven't seen the release webinar, the big piece that Richard announced for Squared Up 4.2 there is the idea of doing multi-object queries. So previously in Squared Up, how our Web API tile worked was whenever you created a dashboard, you had to hard code all the parameters that you wanted to go off to the API query. If you created a perspective, then we could send any of the property values from whatever SCOM object you were on along with the query. So you could parameterize things to a certain extent, but it was always from the single object you were looking at. So great from a computer or something, but it couldn't ever really work with like groups or like enterprise applications, things like that. And you always had to kind of jury rig things together. But now with 4.2, we now have the ability to send a sort of list or an array of objects off to the third-party application. So it's now possible to say, query Splunk for all servers in this EA or for all disks in this group, that kind of thing. So you could really create some powerful dashboards and perspectives now based on that really rich relationship data that you have in SCOM and then whatever data you have in your sort of third-party tool. The other really big piece that made me very happy was that we worked a bit on the editor. So the Moustache editor that you had in prior to 4.2, for Web API queries, it only let you use the properties exactly as they are in SCOM. So if you needed to modify them slightly because, say, the computer names are different between, say, ServiceNow and SCOM, you couldn't. That was it. You were stuffed. So for some customers, they could not integrate things previously that they wanted to. Now what we actually have is full JavaScript fragment support there, the same as we do with custom labels and everything else. So now you can construct these complex, powerful queries that maybe like transform the results of a SCOM object into the right value. So like, change the FQDN into a host name, or you can join lists of server names together to create those in-queries where you say, query for all incidents related to this server, or this server, or this server, or this server, or this server. So now, it really opens a lot of doors in terms of what you could do with the previous APIs you had, but also like APIs that you couldn't previously integrate, you can now hit up and look at as well. I'll show you a demo in a second, but the important thing to remember with this basically is if your tile is scoped to this object, then it just works as it did before, but now you can use fancy JavaScript in your Moustache parameters. If, however, you want to use the new sort of list capability to say all objects in this group or all things contained on this computer, whatever, you need to access that list of objects using the scope variable. Again, I'll show you this in a second, but the scope keyword is what you need to remember here. That's the important sort of change. So,
all right, why don't we see this in action? Because I don't know, some people like me might find it hard to get their heads around things from just a PowerPoint slide.
That was a lot of words, wasn't it?
It was a lot of words.
Let's jump to the demo. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the case of the mismatch property field, because I know that's hit a lot of people, and it's probably quite likely actually for many different sort of monitoring tools and things, or even ITSM tools. So what I have here is a Linux server.
A favorite source of mismatch properties.
Yeah, this is one that a lot of customers have reported actually. So this goes out to all the people out there who desperately wanted to integrate this and couldn't. The limitation with the cross-plat management packs is they don't actually have a field that has the server's host name on it. So you can see here all the name properties they have for this server are all the FQDN. So if your system didn't have the FQDN in it, had just a friendly server name, or there was some kind of prefix based on an acquisition or a server being migrated between different environments, that was it. You couldn't link the two together. So you had to hard code your queries.
By the system, you mean, for example, ServiceNow. So ServiceNow, typically you might just have the computer name in there if you're lucky, but you're not going to have the fully qualified domain name unless you're very diligent.
Yes, exactly. So it depended on your syncing mechanism. So looking at my ServiceNow perspective, you see that it's showing that I have 0 incidents and changes and no open instance and changes. Now I happen to know there is definitely one here. So this perspective is broken. So what I need to do is update it with the new 4.2 functionality to make it work with that. Now if I jump to the tile and go to the headers and data, what you can see is we're sending a query to ServiceNow's API to say that the CI name has to equal the display name from this SCOM object, which in this case is san.pp orco1.san.int.squared.com, which we know it doesn't. So what I need to do is I need to strip off this part of the name so that then ServiceNow can actually correlate it correctly with what it's got. Now, I'm a terrible typist, so I'm going to now copy and paste the query, but basically you just type directly in here. And long-time SquareUp fans will notice that I can actually do that now. I can just type freely inside the Moustache because we made some changes there. So that really annoying, clunky sort of tagging behavior before where once SquareUp accepted a Moustache, it became mutable and you couldn't change it. That's now gone, which is brilliant. If I hit apply changes, hey, we got an incident. Okay, just take my word for it. Let's go and just fix this tile here as well. The important point here is now I'm able to transform the display name however I like. I could do .replace or whatever. Split is a string operator in JavaScript that says break apart the string based on a given character. Like in this case, it's a full stop. And then square bracket, 0, square bracket.
So for those of you listening from the States, he means a period.
Okay, fine. Proudly English. And then square bracket, 0, square bracket is the index operator to say the first bit. So in this case, it will break up this server name into sand, opp, orco1, the word sand, the word int, the word squared up, and the word .com. And then we only want the first bit. That's what the 0 means, because JavaScript arrays are 0 indexed. So if I pop that in and hit apply changes again, so that then breaks up the display name and sends the query off to ServiceNow with this bit changed to just be sand, opp, orco1. And now you can see I can see the incident values. So I can now save this perspective, and for all my Linux machines, it's now correctly, dynamically parameterizing the query, and we're going to see the right information. And in fact, if all of my computers were in with their host name instead, I could apply this one perspective to all computers, and it would work for the Windows ones too.
It would still work because the Windows ones have typically would have no periods or full stops in there.
Well, they'll have the FQDN.
If they have the FQDN, it would also pull out the first name.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a nice common way of doing that. I won't do the changes as well, but as you can imagine, it's the same sort of fix. So that's really powerful now. So you can do any kind of transformation with these properties that you might like, which is really quite nice. So you could change time formats or amalgamate things together or whatever. The other really cool piece, or the full piece of that, was this idea of being able to do scoped queries based on a list of components. So let me go to my sales app and I'll just show you what we're kind of talking about here. So when I went to my Splunk perspective that you were seeing before, this perspective I've configured to kind of be the old way that you used to do it prior to 4.2, which is because we're not on a single SCOM computer here, we're on an enterprise application. That doesn't exist as a thing in Splunk. So what I had to do, I'm in the wrong tab. What I had to do was basically set up some kind of construct in Splunk or in ServiceNow or whatever to group all of my components together. So in this case, there's an index in Splunk called OPP_events. Or maybe in ServiceNow, you'd have a business service that's got the same name as your service. And then my query would query for all events or all incidents related to that thing. But that means that this perspective isn't a template, right? It's specific only to this application. And also it means that I've got to keep that third-party API up to date. Because if I ever add a new computer into my EA and I forget to go and put that machine into that index, this dashboard's now wrong. So this was kind of, it worked, but it wasn't really very manageable and really as dynamic as you actually want it to be.
So it was depending on, in Splunk in this example, it was depending on someone maintaining that index op events and keeping that in sync with the definition of the application here.
Yeah, which as we know is not a thing that happens flawlessly.
It works at the start.
Yes, exactly. It works for about a day. So now what we've got in 4.2 is the ability we had a new panel added. So the scope panel is now here. And the scope panel, what it does is it lets you pick suggestions that you would like to scope this tile to specifically. Or if you want to hit other custom, you can go in advance and configure any kind of relationship walk you'd like in SCOM. But the point is now I can send to the tile not just properties from this single object, but objects that are related to this object. So here's all the Windows computers dynamically inside our application, things like that. And then the tile can process that and send that list of items off to, in this case, Splunk or ServiceNow, whatever API you like. So to kind of show the proof of this, I'm going to walk you through a little scenario. So let's say the SQL team, they know that they get events that they want to see on their SQL dashboard, but they don't want to see all the events from all the servers because the web servers are quite chatty in this and they've got events there that they'll miss. So here I've got an application logs tile. It's showing the last 10 events. Here I've just cropped it down to make it a bit more precise to make the dashboard load faster. Now, if I want to, normally what I would do is scope this to this object, but then it's looking at the sales app directly, and again, Splunk doesn't have a concept for that. So what I'm going to do is change it so that it specifically only receives the Windows computers in the SQL tier of my sales app. Okay, so now those SQL computers are the ones that get sent through, nothing else does. And I can change my query using that magical new scope parameter you had me mention. So the computer name is going to change from any computer in OPP events. I can actually move the index entirely here. I'm not going to bother changing that. So now it needs to be computer name in, and the syntax in Splunk is in and then parentheses and then a comma separated list of names. It'll differ for different APIs. Now what I need to do is insert a snippet of JavaScript that will take my scope object, which contains a group of SCOM servers, and change that into a comma separated list of string names. That sounds complicated, so what we've done is we've put a little picker and helper in here and listed some common operations that you might want. So this is this ships the product. This list is always here. And what it's going to do is gives you the top like 3 that you basically want for most APIs. And it even shows on the right here a live preview of what that snippet actually does. So in this case, it's going to show you that we're going to bundle up the 2 computers in our SQL tier, and it'll put their names in like that with a comma between them. So I know that's the one I want. For those of you who are watching this with the ServiceNow slant, the third one there happens to be the ServiceNow one, because ServiceNow has some slightly kooky syntax. So we thought we'd give you that one for free, just so you've got something to work from. But obviously you can modify these things as well. So if you know your API wants them separated with semicolons or whatever, you can just come in here and change that. Okay. So for those of you who aren't fluent JavaScript heads, I'll sort of walk you through this now. So scope, as I mentioned, is that magical variable that gets defined by squared up to say the variable scope is a list of SCOM objects that are whatever scope you picked. So
okay, so earlier on that was you picked a particular scope in the tile.
Yes.
And that now is the scope that's going to be passed to that variable. So it was the
2 computers in the SQL tier.
Perfect.
So then what I need to do is I need to transform these rich SCOM objects into some strings. Now the map function is a bit like a for each basically. It will go through and say for each item in that array, run some kind of step on them, and the result of that is what becomes the new value in that list. So in this case here, an item, by the way, you could put anything you like there. That could be computer, that could be whatever identifier you like. The important point is that you reference it here. For those of you who are PowerShell fluent, this is a bit like having $_ basically. Okay, so the arrow then says what to do with that item. And in this case, I'm going to have a speech mark. I'm going to have plus the item's display name. And then I'm going to add on the end another speech mark, because I have to insert this, wrap the speech marks around the name in case there's spaces. And then, it won't be for server names obviously, but then at the end, I want to take that list of strings and turn that into one long flat string that gets resulted. And that's what join does. Join is a JavaScript function that takes an array of strings and turns it into one long string separated or delimited by whatever character you specify. So that's why this will now become computer name in bracket OPP-SQL01, close bracket, close speech mark, comma, open speech mark, OPP SQL02. And no matter how many servers I add to that scope, it'll automatically keep increasing that list correctly. So if I hit apply changes and cross my fingers, hey, there we go. So now we're only seeing events from our SQL computers specifically. We're not seeing it from the others. I didn't have to go and reconfigure Splunk. I don't have to have some sort of grouping construct in there and maintain it. And as soon as I go and remap the application in the EA designer and include a new computer in that tier, bam, it'll automatically update here and it'll start querying Splunk for that machine as well.
Very good. Or you could copy that tile and choose to put different types of computers in, for example, if you wanted to show it for your web servers instead of your SQL servers, and so on.
Exactly.
Cool
and you can even parameterize that. You can make it very generic, so you could even have a tile that just says all the computers in the map, and then apply that to all of your different EAs as well if you want to. I've been quite specific here by saying look for a SQL tier. You might not have a SQL tier in all of your applications, so just bear that in mind if you're looking to fully template that particular tile. And this works for anything. So you can make this a group, say for my all Windows computers, or for a particular group of machines, get me all the Splunk data or get me all the tickets. Anytime you have like a top level object that contains other bits, you can now use this sort of multi-level scope or this list level scope to query the API for multiple different things.
Cool.
Very, very powerful.
Very powerful, and helps you reuse things, maintains flexibility. You can do it in perspectives.
Yep.
Super powerful.
Yep, and you can do it on dashboards now as well. That's
right.
Because that scope panel is now available. You can, if you don't have EAs, you're not using perspectives much, you can still now make a top-level dashboard where you scope to, say, a SCOM group or scope to a particular object if you want to, and say, look, just this is the object. I know the object is fixed. It's not dynamic. It doesn't matter for this app. This is the one thing that represents my app, and I can now send its properties off into SCOM land. Just as a note, if you do end up scoping on a dashboard, the tile, let me give you an example of that. If you are on a dashboard and you want to scope the tile to a specific thing, so like, for example, OPP-web01, like this, when you reference that object in a stash, you now need to use scope instead, because the picker here doesn't know in the list whether it's one thing you said or many things. So if your scope is this object, you don't need the scope dot. You can just say display name or whatever parameter you like. The second you're using list or group or suggestions or anything else, you'll need to have scope dot. That's the change. So basically, all your existing dashboards you upgrade will not break. They'll all keep working because they're not using a scope right now. Once you start using a scope of some kind, manually specified or hard-coded or dynamic or whatever, you will then need to use scope dot instead.
All right.
Cool. Excellent. Right. So that's we've got also our support team updated the docs as well. So this is all still sounding very weird. Go and check the articles for Web API now. They've been updated to fully explain how this sort of whole scope and multi-object thing works.
Because this all came out in 4.2.
Yep. So it's about 2 weeks old, I think. Yeah. So it's still pretty fresh and exciting. Excellent. Well, I think at that point, we're going to start wrapping up the webinar because we've been going on a little while now, and we should just about finish on time. So hopefully this was useful for you guys. As John said, everything we've done here is applicable to any other system. If it's not ServiceNow or Splunk you're using, it's, Log Analytics works with that stuff as well. If you're using the Azure tiles. If you're using, Remedy or you're using Sherwell or something, yep, it works with those two. We've got customers now who've told us they've integrated this with a variety of different ITSM and logging and monitoring tools as well, along with some really weird and wonderful examples as well. The important point is, as long as your tool has a JSON-based REST API, which nearly all of them do, you should be able to integrate Squared Up now and get that data you need and put it on a dashboard.
All right.
Excellent.
Cool stuff. Thank you.
Right, so I'm going to jump to our resources slide. So let us know what you'd like us to cover on these coffee breaks. This is our sort of outreach program to you. If you go to community.squaredup.com and go to our Community Answers platform, we look at all the topics there. And if we see sort of common threads emerging or people asking for help with particular topics and the community can't come up with an answer, then we like to jump in and do a webinar on that to kind of cover that. So if you've got a cool thing to show off, definitely show it off there, share it with your peers, because you might also get an answer faster than we can produce a webinar for it. Our users on Community Answers are wicked smart, and they'll probably come up with a better answer than we would anyway. So definitely go and look at that platform and check it out if you haven't seen it before. If you're watching this on YouTube and you'd like to get access to live recordings in future so you can ask questions and be part of the discussion, go to squareup.com/coffee-break-series and you can sign up there and we'll mail you the webinar links so you can be notified ahead of time, schedule time in and join us for the content. The recordings and slides, along with a whole bunch of other good content, are published on our blog. So make sure you go and check that out if you want those links we showed you earlier or just other related topics. It's always worth going and taking a look. And there's a YouTube playlist as well for this particular series, so you can watch all 51 previous coffee breaks and just get a great hit of knowledge about Squared Up and what we do, but also enterprise monitoring and SCOM in general as well. We've had some pretty cool webinars recently, like we had a webinar with the actual SCOM product team on what's new in SCOM 2019. So if you haven't looked at that yet, definitely go and check that out and have a look as well. Okay, as always, myself and John, along with our engineering team, will be online to answer questions. So if you have questions, please stick around. If not, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Matthew.
And we'll talk to you next month, guys.